Have you ever wondered what might be hidden in the dusty corners of an antique shop, where time seems to stand still and every item tells a forgotten story? Daniel had always been fascinated by the past, by objects that held memories, stories, and lives long gone. He spent years collecting antiques, finding treasures in flea markets, estate sales, and hidden shops tucked away in obscure corners of the city. But there was one shop, an old, almost hidden place called Whispers of the Past, that always seemed to call to him, a place he couldn't quite explain why he was drawn to. On a dreary, overcast afternoon, he found himself standing outside it, staring at the cracked wooden sign above the door, his curiosity gnawing at him. As he stepped inside, the smell of aged wood and dust wrapped around him like a thick blanket, the air dense with history. The shopkeeper, an old man with pale eyes that gleamed in the dim light, gave him a silent nod as he walked through the rows of curiosities, each one more bizarre than the last. Then he saw it, the doll. It sat on a shelf in the farthest corner, surrounded by other dolls that appeared too fragile to touch. But this one was different. It had an air of quiet elegance, its porcelain face almost lifelike, its glassy blue eyes staring directly at him, as if it were aware of his presence. He reached out, unable to resist the pull it had on him, his fingers brushing against the cold porcelain. "Careful with that one," the shopkeeper's voice cracked through the silence, sending a shiver down Daniel's spine. "That's a rare one. The Dollmaker's curse is attached to it. Many have tried to own it, but none have ever truly escaped its grip." Daniel, ever the skeptic, laughed it off, believing it to be nothing more than the old man's ramblings. He bought the doll, too intrigued by its beauty to leave it behind. As he left the shop, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong, but the thought quickly passed as he arrived home and set the doll on the mantel. It was a quiet evening at first, as usual, with only the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the corner of the living room. Daniel sat on the couch, lost in thought, trying to forget the strange words of the shopkeeper. But then something shifted. He could have sworn the doll's position had changed, but he brushed it off as his imagination. Over the next few days, things began to happen that Daniel couldn't ignore. Objects would move, slightly but enough to be noticed. A book that had been on the shelf was found on the floor, its pages open to a chapter he didn't remember reading. The kitchen lights flickered without reason, casting long shadows across the room. At night, as Daniel lay in bed, a whispering sound would creep through the cracks in the walls, soft and unintelligible, like a distant murmur of voices just out of reach. One night, as he tried to sleep, the whispering grew louder. His heart began to race and he sat up, staring into the darkness, trying to pinpoint the source. Suddenly, a loud crash came from the living room. He jumped out of bed, his breath catching in his throat, and rushed to the source of the noise. The doll was no longer sitting upright on the mantel. It was now lying face down on the floor, its delicate porcelain body cracked as if something, or someone, had violently knocked it over. His pulse pounded in his ears as he picked it up, inspecting the damage. The cracks weren't there before. The once perfect face of the doll had begun to show signs of age, small fissures running through the porcelain like cracks in glass, and its once bright eyes were now dull, almost sunken. It didn't make sense. How could a doll change so quickly? The unease settled in deeper that night, and Daniel, trying to shake off the creeping dread, decided to leave the doll in the living room while he slept. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, more distinct, and closer. At first, he thought it was the house settling, but then he heard something far more sinister, a voice calling his name, soft but unmistakable. "Daniel. Daniel?" He bolted upright in bed, heart hammering in his chest. The air felt cold, far colder than it had been moments ago. He hesitated, his mind fighting to dismiss the terror clawing at him. The voice had come from the living room, and when he checked, the doll was standing upright once more, despite being thrown to the floor hours earlier. But that wasn't what made his blood run cold. It was the smile. The doll's once serene, blank expression had twisted into a grotesque, unnatural grin. The following days were a blur of strange occurrences. Daniel would wake up to find the furniture rearranged, the doll always present, its cracked face growing more distorted each time he saw it. And then came the smells. Faint at first, like something burning, but soon the scent grew stronger, pungent, rotting wood and decay. The whispers had turned into soft laughter, a cruel and mocking sound that seemed to come from all around him. Daniel could no longer tell whether the house was playing tricks on him, or if he was truly losing his grip on reality. Then the doll began to change even further. Its eyes, once glassy and cold, now gleamed with an unnatural light. Its skin began to wrinkle, its porcelain face aging at a disturbing rate. The small cracks that had appeared soon grew into deep fissures, spreading across the doll's face like a spider's web. And the laughter, it was louder now, taunting, following him wherever he went. Daniel's dread reached its peak when one evening, while standing in the hallway, he saw the doll standing at the foot of the stairs, its eyes fixed on him. It was no longer just a doll. It had become something else, something alive, something that wanted him. As he approached, his heart pounded in his chest, and the laughter grew to an unbearable volume. He reached out to touch it, but the moment his fingers brushed against the doll's cracked face, everything went black. The next morning, his house was eerily silent. The doll was gone, as was the laughter. But Daniel could feel something was terribly wrong. He tried to leave, to escape, but it was no use. The house had changed. The walls seemed to close in on him, and the air thickened, suffocating him. His only escape was the doll, which, as he turned to look, had reappeared on the mantel, smiling that twisted grin. The whispers returned, now clear and loud. "You can't leave. You're ours now." And then, as if the curse had fully taken hold, Daniel realized the horrifying truth. The doll was not just cursed, it was a vessel, a conduit for the vengeful spirit of the Dollmaker, who had bound his own soul to the dolls he created. And now, Daniel was the latest victim, trapped forever in a house that had become a prison, with no escape. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was the doll's eyes, glowing with malevolent triumph. The house was eventually abandoned, but rumors still swirl in town. People claim they hear whispers in the wind on stormy nights, faint but unmistakable, calling someone's name. And sometimes, if you walk past the old house late at night, you might just catch a glimpse of the doll's eyes staring out from the window, waiting for its next victim.